And so after that, there are, of course, consequences. So if you live incorrectly in the world, God does something after you've replaced him with an idol. He doesn't just stand idly by. He then goes on to say what those consequences are for having those idols.
Yeah. So, there's evidence. We suppress the evidence. We suppress the evidence by creating idols. The problem then becomes, but these idols have consequences. The result of our suppression, creating idols, have consequences, right?
Think about it like a longer math equation. If you get your first answer wrong and you use that wrong answer in other parts of your algebra, you're ultimately going to get even greater.
The whole thing is way off. Yeah, she says that God is constantly reaching out to people with evidence, right? That's what the point that she's trying to make here, of his existence through general revelation. But humans are constantly suppressing those truths by creating evidence. And so this pattern of suppression, she says, creates an acute internal tension.
Right. I think it's important too that this evidence it's not just a byproduct of creation. It's not like, those things kind of like generally talk about God. This is intentionality. There's a reason that God creates the space that he does and the way that he does. He has a purpose.
Yeah, he's reaching out to us, right? He wants to have a relationship with us. We're created to have a relationship with the true and the living God.
We see that in the initial creation. That was the whole point of it.
Yeah, in fact, even after Adam and Eve sinned, God is the one that takes the initiative to reach out to them and to find them and that sort of thing. Right? And so God wants us to have a relationship with him. And so all of creation is screaming that God exists, right? And of course, we don't want that kind of God in our lives. And so we suppress that evidence. We create idols. And then she says this creates an acute internal tension. She calls it cognitive dissonance, right? So there's another psychological or psychology term, right? Cognitive discipline, right? How does God break us out of this trap? So, we keep creating surrogate gods in a desperate attempt to suppress that evidence. And so we're caught in this cognitive dissonance. That is the mental stress of harboring concepts that contradict one another. Right? That's cognitive dissonance. This is this is the result of what it should be, but we don't adhere to that. And even though we know we should. Right, and so that's the idea here.
Yeah, we can kind of think a little bit like there's a movie where the father and the son are in the concentration camp, and the father tries to convince his son that they have to play a game in order to get a tank at the end. Life is Beautiful is what it's called, and so everything that the son sees is just a result of the game. So you have to hide when the black boots come and stay quiet, and then you get points towards your tank. And so everything is done as a game, and I won't spoil the ending, but that it's not the son viewing facts and saying no I don't accept that, but it's in context of trusting his father, of presenting those events happening in his life in a certain way to cause him to act. So he's kind of not seeing what's actually there, even though if you were to look at it with a little bit more critique, why am I getting a tank all of a sudden? When
and so the idea here, though, is that we know that we're in a concentration camp. We're just pretending somehow that we're not, and therefore it sets up an internal, what she calls, cognitive dissonance, this internal tension, right? Something that we know, and yet we're refusing to accept, right? And so, so now we're struggling with that. And so she says, how does God break us out of this trap? This, I know this, but I'm not accepting it. I'm suppressing it. This tension that I have, this cognitive dissonance. She says that he responds in a way that we might not expect, right? What does he do? Well, she says he ratchets up the tension, right?
Turn it up.
Yeah, he allows us to live out the consequences of our idols in order to intensify the cognitive dissonance and ultimately to press us to the point of making a decision. After that, the idea here is we suppress, we fight against it, and so he ratchets up the tension with the ultimate goal of saying, okay, yep, I realize what I'm doing here, and I'm going to stop it. Right? That's the kind. He allows us to live out the consequences of our ideas, or our idols rather, in order to intensify the cognitive dissonance. ultimately to press us to the point of making a decision. So what she says here is Paul tells us that God gives people up to experience the consequences of their choices, right? Yeah. God gives us up like that. And Romans 1:21 says, although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their thinking, right? Romans 1:28 says, since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind.
Right. It's kind of like God saying, okay, if you want to live in a way that you reject me, here, live in that world.
Yeah.
And so
that you can see the consequences of living like that.
Yeah. And so it's if you've ever read C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, his explanation of hell is similar to this, and saying that there are no prisoners in hell. There are people that continue to want to be separated from God, and hell is that ultimate consequence of putting them out and saying, if you want to live apart from me,
people get what they want.
Yeah,
right?
I think the term is there are no locks on the doors in hell. And so that's kind of a similar fashion of if you want to read kind of a Pilgrim's Progress of hell, then The Great Divorce is a decent book for that.
Right. And so out of these verses 21, what are the consequences of serving idols? Paul says that they become futile in their thinking, right? Paul's answer starts with the inner life, right? This futility that comes in their thinking. God gave them up to a debased mind, it says here in Romans 1:28. And so that is, so it starts with the inner life. It starts with, because that's really where the battle is being waged, right? Something that we know, epistemology, right? And yet we're fighting against, we're trying to suppress it. And so that's where God starts, in the inner mind, right?